Every year, more than 10 million people die from cancer worldwide. That's a number so large it's almost impossible to picture. It's like wiping out the entire population of a major country every single year. And according to researchers, up to a third of those cases could be linked to something as simple, as ordinary as what we eat and how we reheat it. That's right, it's not just what you eat, it's what you do to your food after you've already cooked it. The second act, the part nobody talks about. Today, you're going to discover 4 foods that, when reheated, quietly create toxic compounds your body struggles to break down and eliminate. These aren't exotic foods, they're not junk food, they're staples, the kind of thing sitting in your fridge right now. And the 4th one is going to genuinely surprise you because it's probably in your kitchen at this very moment and it's not even a solid food. Stick with me until the end, because that last one could change the way you cook for the rest of your life. Let's talk about the bigger picture first. We are, as a culture, obsessed with eating healthy. We count calories, we read nutrition labels, we avoid added sugar, we buy organic when we can afford it. We do all of this because we believe, rightly, that food is medicine, or it can be poison, depending on the choices we make. But there's a massive blind spot in all of this health-conscious behavior, and it's hiding in plain sight what happens to food after it comes off the heat the first time. We obsess over the ingredients. We rarely think about the process of reheating, the microwave at lunch, the leftover dinner warmed up 2 days later, the same pan of oil used again and again. The World Health Organization has classified several compounds formed during repeated cooking processes as potentially carcinogenic to humans. Let that sink in for a second. Not the raw ingredient, but the process itself, the act of heating something more than once, can change its chemistry in ways that matter to your long-term health. Organizations like the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, part of the WHO, have spent decades studying how certain thermal processes generate substances capable of damaging our cells at a molecular level. This isn't fringe science. This is decades of peer-reviewed research sitting quietly in academic journals, rarely making it into a headline, and almost never making it into a kitchen. Researchers have also linked improper reheating of certain foods to elevated markers of what's called silent inflammation in the body. I want you to remember that phrase, silent inflammation, because you're going to hear it several times today, and by the end of this video, it's going to be the thread that ties every single point together. Here's the thing you need to understand before we go any further. This isn't about one bad meal ruining your health. Nobody is going to develop cancer because they microwaved leftover chicken once. The problem isn't acute, it's cumulative. Think of it like cigarette smoke. One puff isn't going to kill you, but repeated exposure, day after day, year after year, slowly builds the biological groundwork for disease. That's exactly how this works. It's not dramatic, it's not immediate, it's slow, quiet, and compounding, which is precisely why it's so dangerous. Nobody notices it happening. Before we get into who I am, let me just say this clearly. I'm not here to scare you into never eating leftovers again. Leftovers are fine. Reheating food is fine. This video is about specific foods, specific mechanisms, and specific mistakes that turn an ordinary habit into a long-term risk, and more importantly, exactly what to do instead. My name is Dr. William Lee. I've spent more than 20 years researching how diet influences cancer development at the cellular level. Specifically, my work has focused on how certain food-derived compounds interact with the microenvironment surrounding our cells, the biological neighborhood, if you will, where cells either thrive in a healthy state or begin the slow drift toward disease. I want to be completely transparent with you. I'm not here to sell you a supplement, a meal plan, or a miracle diet. I don't have a product at the end of this video. What I have is information that frankly should already be common knowledge, should already be printed on the inside of every kitchen cabinet, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, simply isn't. Everything I'm about to share with you is grounded in publicly available scientific research, studies published in peer-reviewed journals, assessments from international health organizations, and decades of accumulated clinical observation. And by the end of this video, I promise you'll walk away with something practical, not just a list of what to avoid, but exactly what to do instead, using nothing more than what you probably already have in your kitchen. Now, before we dive into the list itself, I need to give you 3 foundational concepts. Think of these as the keys that unlock everything else in this video. Once you understand these 3 ideas, every single point on this list is going to make intuitive sense. You won't need to memorize anything, because the logic will simply click into place. The first concept is oxidative stress. Here's the simplest way I can explain it. When certain foods are heated more than once, their molecular structure begins to break down in new ways. This breakdown generates what scientists call free radicals, unstable molecules that go looking for stability by stealing electrons from your body's healthy cells. Picture a spark that jumps from surface to surface, slowly scorching whatever it touches. That's essentially what oxidative stress does inside your body over time, a slow, cumulative kind of cellular damage. It's one of the most extensively studied mechanisms connected to cellular aging, tissue damage, and, critically for today's topic, the early stages of several types of cancer. The second concept is cumulative toxic load. Your body isn't defenseless against harmful substances. You have an incredible detox system, and your liver is the star player. Every day, your liver processes and neutralizes countless compounds that would otherwise cause harm. But here's the catch. That system has limits. It's not designed to handle constant, unrelenting exposure. When you're exposed to the same low-level toxic compounds again and again, through diet, environment, or habits like repeated reheating, that detox system gets pushed closer and closer to its ceiling. It's not a single poisoning event. It's a slow accumulation, like sediment building up at the bottom of a river, invisible, until, eventually, it isn't. And the third concept, the one I really want you to hold on to, is silent inflammation. This is chronic, low-grade inflammation that produces none of the symptoms we typically associate with inflammation. No fever, no swelling, no pain, it doesn't announce itself, and yet a growing body of research has connected this type of inflammation to the development of numerous chronic diseases, including several forms of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic disorders. It's called silent for a very specific reason. By the time it produces a symptom, you can actually notice the underlying damage has often been building for years, sometimes decades. So hold on to these 3 ideas: oxidative stress, cumulative toxic load, and silent inflammation, because every single food on this list connects back to one or more of these mechanisms. Let's get into it. Let's start with chicken, because it's probably the single most common protein sitting in refrigerators around the world right now. It's affordable, it's versatile, it fits into virtually every diet and cuisine. And critically, we perceive it as the safe protein, the healthy alternative to red meat that nutritionists have recommended for decades. Because of that reputation, people cook large batches of chicken with total confidence, planning to eat it across multiple meals throughout the week, reheating it again and again without a second thought. Here's what's actually happening at a biological level. When chicken is cooked the first time, its proteins already undergo a certain degree of thermal breakdown. That's simply what cooking is, a controlled transformation of raw protein into something digestible and safe. But when you reheat that same chicken, you're applying additional heat to a structure that has already been altered once. This repeated thermal stress promotes the formation of compounds called heterocyclic amines, chemical byproducts that form specifically when animal proteins are exposed to high heat, especially repeated high heat. Researchers studying these compounds have linked them to DNA damage at the cellular level, the kind of damage that, if it accumulates over years without proper repair, becomes a contributing factor in cancer development. But there's a second layer to this problem that most people never even consider. Uneven reheating creates a bacterial risk. If you've ever reheated chicken in a microwave, you know how uneven microwave heating can be, piping hot on one edge, barely warm in the center. Those cooler zones become a comfortable environment for bacteria like Salmonella to survive and even multiply. Now, to be clear, that's not directly a cancer risk, it's a foodborne illness risk. But here's the connection. Every time your immune system has to fight off a bacterial infection, it generates an inflammatory response. And when that happens repeatedly, meal after meal, week after week, It adds another layer onto the same silent inflammation we talked about earlier. It's not one single mechanism causing harm, it's multiple small insults compounding over time. So what should you actually do? First, if you're going to reheat chicken, only do it once, not multiple times across several days. Second, make sure it reaches an internal temperature of at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit, checked at the thickest, densest part of the meat, not just judged by how hot it feels on the surface. And honestly, the best strategy is prevention. Cook portion size for the meal you're about to eat, and if you do have leftovers, freeze them immediately rather than leaving them in the refrigerator for several days before reheating. Freezing effectively pauses that clock of bacterial growth and slows some of the chemical degradation processes we talked about. Now let's move to something that might genuinely surprise you: spinach. Spinach has an almost untouchable reputation in the health world. It's iron-rich, loaded with vitamins A, C, and K, packed with antioxidants. It's the poster child of clean eating. Precisely because of that reputation, absolutely nobody suspects spinach of being capable of causing harm. And that's exactly what makes this one so important to understand. Spinach, along with other leafy greens like beets, celery, and lettuce, naturally contains relatively high levels of nitrates. In their original natural form, these nitrates aren't dangerous at all. In fact, some research even suggests dietary nitrates from vegetables can support healthy blood flow and circulation. The problem isn't the nitrates themselves, it's what happens to them under specific conditions. When cooked spinach is stored, cooled, and then reheated, that heat-cool-reheat cycle creates favorable conditions for nitrates to convert into nitrites. And under certain chemical circumstances, particularly involving proteins and stomach acid during digestion, those nitrites can further convert into compounds called nitrosamines. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified several nitrosamines as probable human carcinogens, with a specific association to cancers of the digestive system, including stomach and colorectal cancer. What makes this particular example so unsettling is that it's a perfect illustration of silent inflammation and hidden chemical transformation happening in a food we consider almost universally beneficial. There's no change in color, no off smell, no difference in taste. The spinach on your plate looks and tastes exactly the same, whether it's fresh or whether it's undergone multiple heating cycles that have quietly shifted its chemical composition. So here's what I recommend instead. Cook spinach in the quantity you're actually going to eat in that sitting. Spinach cooks down so much anyway that it's easy to portion appropriately. If you do end up with leftovers, don't reheat them. Instead, eat that leftover spinach cold, tossed into a salad, blended into a green smoothie, or added to a cold grain bowl. And if you must store cooked spinach for later, refrigerate it as quickly as possible, ideally within 2 hours of cooking, which significantly slows down that nitrate to nitrite conversion process. Next on the list is rice, arguably the single most consumed staple food on the entire planet, forming the caloric backbone of diets across Asia, Latin America, Africa, and beyond. It's inexpensive, neutral in flavor, endlessly versatile, and almost universally, people cook far more than they need in one sitting, planning to reheat the rest across the following days. The mechanism here is completely different from the previous two examples, and honestly, it's one of the most important things I can teach you in this entire video. Raw, uncooked rice can harbor spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. Now, cooking rice absolutely kills the active bacteria, but here's the critical detail: it doesn't necessarily destroy the spores. Spores are essentially a dormant, highly resistant survival form that certain bacteria produce specifically to withstand harsh conditions, including high heat. If cooked rice is left sitting at room temperature for an extended period, which happens constantly, whether it's rice cooling on the counter before being put away or rice sitting out at a buffet, those surviving spores begin to germinate and produce toxins. And here's the part that genuinely surprises most people. Reheating that rice afterward does not eliminate those toxins. Heat is very effective at killing active bacteria, but certain bacterial toxins are heat stable, meaning they can survive even vigorous reheating, even boiling in some cases. This exact scenario has a name in clinical and public health circles: fried rice syndrome. a form of food poisoning specifically associated with rice that's been improperly cooled and stored before being reheated. It causes an acute inflammatory response in the gastrointestinal tract, and with repeated exposure over months and years, contributes to that same broader pattern of silent inflammation we've been discussing. There's also emerging research connecting repeated gastrointestinal insults like this to progressive damage of the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive tract that play a surprisingly significant role in immune function. And a growing body of recent research has specifically linked disruptions in gut microbiome health to increased risk of colorectal cancer. The fix here is refreshingly simple. Cool cooked rice quickly, ideally within 1 hour of cooking, rather than letting it sit out for an entire afternoon or overnight. Refrigerate it promptly, and if you do reheat it, do so only once, making absolutely certain that it's heated all the way through until it's steaming hot, not just warmed on the surface while the center remains lukewarm. Now, before I tell you about the fourth item on this list, the one I promised you at the very beginning, the surprising one that's probably in your kitchen right now and isn't even a solid food, I want to ask you for something quick. If you're finding this information valuable, take a second right now and subscribe to this channel. Every week, I break down research just like this, translating dense scientific studies into practical, plain language guidance you can actually use in your daily life without needing a medical degree to understand it. And I promise you, what's coming up next might be the single most important piece of information in this entire video. Here it is, reused vegetable oil. This is the one that almost nobody thinks of as reheating, because we don't typically think of oil as a food that gets reheated. We think of it as a cooking medium, a tool, not an ingredient with its own biological consequences. But every single time you fry something and then reuse that same oil to fry a second batch, to saute vegetables the next day, to cook literally anything, you are in effect reheating an active ingredient that ends up in nearly everything you eat. Vegetable oils, particularly those high in polyunsaturated fats, like sunflower oil, corn oil, and soybean oil, are chemically unstable when exposed to heat. Every single time they're heated, a portion of their fat molecules undergo oxidation. This is a completely normal part of cooking with oil the first time, but if you heat that same oil again, which is standard practice in countless households and frankly in a large portion of the restaurant industry, that oxidation doesn't just repeat, it compounds and multiplies. The result of this repeated oxidation is the formation of compounds like aldehydes and polar compounds, byproducts that a substantial body of research has linked to significant oxidative stress throughout the body, measurable damage to the inner lining of arterial walls, and inflammatory processes that researchers have connected to elevated risk for several types of cancer, particularly those affecting the digestive tract. What makes reused oil especially dangerous in my view is its invisibility. Reheated, oxidized oil doesn't dramatically change color right away. It doesn't develop an obviously rancid smell after just 1 or 2 uses, so people keep using it, frying with it again and again and again, completely unaware that with every single cycle, it becomes measurably more toxic. In many ways, this is the most literal example of silent inflammation you'll find in an ordinary kitchen, quite literally bottled up, sitting in a pan or a bottle by the stove, invisible and undetected. So what should you do instead? First and most importantly, use oil only once for frying, then discard it. Don't save it for next time. Second, if you're cooking with high heat regularly, choose more heat-stable oils, like extra virgin olive oil or coconut oil, both of which oxidize significantly more slowly than polyunsaturated vegetable oils. And finally, pay attention to warning signs. If oil starts smoking at a lower temperature than it used to, or if it develops any unusual smell, that's your cue to throw it out immediately. No exceptions. Let's take a moment to quickly recap everything we've covered, because I want this information to actually stick with you, not just wash over you and disappear the moment this video ends. Chicken repeated reheating promotes the formation of heterocyclic amines, and uneven heating creates conditions for bacterial survival, adding both chemical and inflammatory burden over time. Spinach, its naturally occurring nitrates convert into nitrites and potentially nitrosamines during repeated heating cycles, compounds the IARC has linked specifically to digestive cancer risk. Rice Bacillus cereus spores can survive initial cooking and produce heat-stable toxins if the rice is improperly cooled, and reheating does not neutralize those toxins, while repeated exposure can damage long-term gut health. Reused vegetable oil, it undergoes progressive oxidation with every reheating cycle, generating compounds linked to arterial damage and systemic inflammation. Notice the pattern running through all four examples: oxidative stress, cumulative toxic exposure, and silent inflammation. Three mechanisms working quietly, invisibly, in the background of some of the most ordinary meals imaginable. I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about something that genuinely troubles me about my work. This information isn't secret, it's not locked away in some inaccessible archive. It's published, it's peer-reviewed, it's sitting in scientific journals, freely available to anyone who knows where to look, and yet it almost never reaches the people who could actually benefit from knowing it. Over the years, I've encountered patients who did everything right by conventional standards. They ate rice instead of refined pasta, spinach instead of iceberg lettuce, grilled chicken instead of red meat. They believed, reasonably, that they were making the healthiest possible choices. And they never once imagined that the way they stored, cooled, and reheated that same food could be quietly working against their long-term health for years, even decades. I want to be very clear. I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel guilty. Nobody taught us this. Not in school, not from our parents, not anywhere in mainstream nutrition advice. This is precisely the kind of information that falls through the cracks between scientific research and everyday practical knowledge, technically available to everyone, but functionally invisible to almost everyone. That gap is exactly why I care so much about creating content like this. Not to generate fear for the sake of clicks, not to convince you that your kitchen is secretly poisoning you, but to hand you simple, practical, immediately actionable tools. Tools that don't require spending extra money, buying special equipment, or overhauling your entire diet. If there's someone in your life who cooks regularly for other people, your mother, your partner, a grandparent living alone who reheats the same pot of food for days at a time, consider sharing this video with them, not as an alarming warning meant to scare them, but as a genuine act of care. Sometimes the simplest piece of information, shared at the right moment, is exactly what protects the people we love most, long before they'd ever think to look for it themselves. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, which of these four foods do you find yourself reheating most often at home? And if there's another food, ingredient, or cooking habit you'd like me to dig into and research for a future video, leave it in the comments below. I genuinely read through them, and a significant number of my upcoming videos come directly from questions and topics that you all suggest. One final note before we wrap up. This video is intended purely for educational and informational purposes. It is not a substitute for professional medical, nutritional, or dietary advice. If you have specific health conditions, concerns, or questions about your diet, please consult with a qualified physician or registered nutritionist before making significant changes to your eating habits. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.